Okay, so today I'm very pleased to have with me Professor Gabriel Levy from NTNU, who is, well, he's a professor of religious studies, and he has worked for I think, more than 20 years in a field called the cognitive science of religion. And Gabe also was my PhD supervisor, and he's my great friend, so I'm very happy to talk to you today. So welcome.
Thank you. Nice.
And yeah. So well, I think we have had a lot of great discussions over the years about this meeting between religion and science and all this, I think, like philosophical issues that arise when we talk about what is religion, and when we talk about the study of religion, and also the intersection with philosophy, which is sort of the investigation of a lot of fundamental and basic issues about reality and knowledge and everything. So I think that today let's delve into some of these topics that we have discussed, and I would like to start with a personal question about why did you decide to get into religious studies? Like, how did you get into that field?
Well, so I was, I would say, religious growing up. Like I grew up in a Jewish home, and I was bar mitzvahed and believed in God and that sort of thing. And I read the Bible as a kid, read the Old Testament. I was really interested in that, and always was just drawn to religion. And then in college, I started taking religious studies at Dartmouth for my bachelor, and was introduced to the scientific study of religion, or the scholastic study of religion, and I guess I became less religious in the course of that, because part of the idea is you learn about all the other religions. And I just had really great teachers who were, inspiring. And so that kind of pushed me down that road.
Yeah.
But I've always been just really interested in religion, all the stuff internal to religion, like the beliefs that people have and the practices, but also like why we have religion in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think many people experience that go into religious studies, they have this experience of having to think about their own tradition from the outside and seeing that it's part of this bigger picture. And I think I experienced something similar, that I was I had a hunch or a sort of belief in God as a child, and I prayed frequently in some times of my life, and I had this well, as I said, like a hunch that there is this higher being somehow, and I cannot really explain it. I don't know where it comes from, and I also, when I was in my early 20s, started investigating this. Like, did I just talk to like a fantasy person when as a kid? And do I have any? Is there any proof that there is a higher being, or is it just something I was led to, like through my upbringing somehow? And I also, the last, I would say, the last 20 years, I have been thinking really a lot about this whole idea of God and where it comes from, and but I was not like a fervent believer.
No.
It has always been ambivalent and weird that there is this invisible person somehow that we can relate to, but we cannot really see or touch it or experience in any normal way. So yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I agree.
This
Like
belief.
the people who study religion, it would be weird if you never were kind of religious and then you went and studied religion. I think it would be a bit strange. Like people are interested in religion mostly because they have like they've had some connection to it, you know. So
Hmm. And well, I discovered at the same time as I was studying philosophy, I discovered new atheism and Richard Dawkins and all of that stuff, and that was like a sort of shock therapy for me that forced me to think, what if everything I believed was just bullshit? And but the way he said it was like, okay, let's not be polite anymore about religion. Let's just say exactly all in his opinion, like what it is. But it also, I think, after a while, that also became a bit predictable and not philosophically so interesting, because it's a sort of very uh, um, simple view, a very like a dogmatic view of anti-religious view that became less interesting. I think we both have this ambivalence about religion, that it's at least I get that feeling when we have discussed over the years that it's not really clear cut exactly or binary, that either it's absolutely true or it's just bullshit and fantasy. It's
yeah,
like it's always more complicated, and
yeah, I would
that
agree.
makes it a very fascinating topic, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about so the idea that we can have a science of religion is not we shouldn't take for granted. There were some historical and intellectual conditions that needed to be in place in order for a scientific community to say that, okay, religion is an object for science. It's like a research object, like a topic, because I think that I think that for a long previous to the Enlightenment age, I think if you think about the medieval age in Europe, I think religion was everywhere, but that doesn't mean people had the concept, like a clear like idea that it's religion, and that in another part of the world they have something else, but it belongs in the same category. But what do you think about this idea that well, it's a big question, like how can we have a science of religion? Like
Yeah,
how is that?
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So like it's definitely true that that there wasn't every culture doesn't have our, or I don't know, a Western concept of religion. Um,
Mm.
and there are so many different ways to approach that problem, like that fact. And yeah, I mean, one is like that you say, well, that means we can't we can't have a science of religion.
Yeah.
But I don't really take that point of view, um, because, it's the analogy is like not every culture has the concept of an electron or of gravity or of anything like that, and but we still could have science about those things. It's this tradition in the religious studies, which is like we get to decide just for kind of practical purposes of our ongoing science what we mean by religion. Like, so the kind of
Mm.
Jamesian approach, in this case what we mean by religion is this, and we're
Yeah.
going to do our best to try to understand it or explain it.
Mm.
It might mean, for me, I'm in like, so the concept of religion might not be a universal concept, but I do think that there are universals that human beings share. You know,
Yeah.
so like, very basic concepts. I think it would be weird if we didn't have that. Like it would mean you couldn't communicate basically with other human beings. And so
Mm.
the fact that we can means we share something. So really that's where I start as far as building to a concept of religion, more like from the ground up. Like what are the concepts we share and what does that say about religion?
Like, yeah, like a bottom-up approach to
Yeah.
building the
I mean,
concept of
yeah,
yeah.
but and also conceptually like a bottom up approach. So like what are the kind of minimal things we can agree on about religion? And if we can't agree on it, then that's something to discuss, you know? So
But when
it's a
when
process of translation always.
yeah, but when you talk about these universal aspects of human language communication, what do you think is the most important? What do you build on? What do you think are the most important, like universal features of
Well, so I don't know
humans that
for on with regard to religion, you mean, or just
yeah, with regard to
yeah,
building a concept
yeah.
of religion?
So like um so this concept of agency, for
Yeah.
example, I think is central. And I think so. I think it's such a basic concept that even like maybe very primitive organisms in a way have the concept of agency. Like it's something that's so basic.
So when we talk about agency for our viewers, what do we mean by agency? Do we mean like that things are alive, that things
Basically, yeah, something is a lot, something that acts
something that acts?
basically
Yeah.
for a purpose, like
Yeah.
it it
Like
it
an animal
moves.
moving through the forest is very different from a stone just moving down slope.
Exactly.
It
Yeah,
both have movement, but only one of them have agency, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So yeah, yeah.
and
So
so,
agency is the
yeah, so
central.
agency is one. And so, um, I
Yeah.
mean, and I think something like a concept of, well, I think all human beings have rituals or
Mm.
aware of, there's a ritual dimension to human life. So that's a part of religion that I think is maybe universal. Like maybe not all rituals, but things like birth rituals or mourning practices. I would be really surprised if that wasn't something all human beings share,
Mm.
something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. It's a. Also agree. I think ritual is really central to human life, and that there is evidence for burials that are 100,000 years old, and in many different parts of the world there are evidence of ritual in the Paleolithic and perhaps even earlier, but we don't really know. But it's really seems to be central and also outside of religion, like
Yeah.
some sort of, which we will get to, I think, in our conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Ritual doesn't necessarily have to be
yeah,
religious.
yeah. But about definition, so you would say that it it can be religion can be defined.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say it can be defined basically not as like a, I don't know, as a kind of stipulative definition or a
yeah,
pragmatic definition, like
yeah,
to help you move things along,
yeah,
not in some like pristine ontological sense, like that when you define religion, that is something that exists in like a platonic realm or something, but that it's a conversation partner, the definition of religion.
Yeah, it's a tool.
The tool, yeah.
Tool. That's also how I think about it, as a tool. And I think it's when we read different works on religion, they often have different definitions. And I think that sometimes authors are they don't make those qualifications that we make. They write books that have like a title like Pascal Boyer's book Religion Explained. But when you read the book, you can see that he is explaining religion in a very specific sense, as something like information that is propagated between people, and it's something very specific. And someone else maybe someone who is inspired by like a Durkheim or Schleiermacher might have an entirely different view about what religion is, and might say that, well, he's not explaining religion, he's explaining what he calls religion, but it isn't. And that makes it after reading all this stuff for a long time now, I think I agree with you. It's something like a map and terrain issue, that these definitions are like maps, but they also decide what we mean by the terrain. Like what we are actually discussing is also, in a sense, determined by what we mean by the concept. And that is very tricky, because it's not like, I think, like the DNA molecule can be defined in a very specific way. It's not the same with defining religion. So it's a tricky thing, and I'm really agnostic about whether there is any.
I don't know that. I think it's true. I like how you put that, but I mean, there is.
Or you think that's going too far?
No, like if like I've been reading some research that's questioning, what do electrons really exist, for example, like as we define them, as we and the concept of electron is also like a placeholder in physics for like something else that's gonna, that's coming down the line. Basically, it's a simplification of something, and you need these things to do all science. So I wouldn't say it's only
Okay.
a more social sciencey fields that have this.
Okay, you would say it's more broad in science in general, that what we mean by things is really important, like for
that
determining.
you have this map territory metaphor that you brought up, or map and that these are kind of in a relation, constantly kind of circling each other. But they're not the same. The map is not the territory, but they kind of mutually kind of constrain one another in all scientific fields.
Because I think that when we met, I was really into this metaphysical realism, and this idea that the world is independent of our thoughts and beliefs about it, and that statements are true if they correspond. At least that was a very attractive thing to think, that statements are true if they correspond to some fact about the world, and that truth has to do with this relationship between the mind and the world. But I think actually discussing with you has influenced me, and also reading a lot of stuff over the years has made me less sure about this whole correspondence thing. But I'm not really haven't concluded yet what I think.
Okay. So you would still say you're a realist of some sort?
In some sense, I would still say I'm a realist, but maybe I'm more qualified. form of realism. And especially for me, especially in religious studies, it seems that it would be problematic to think that religion has a sort of inner nature or essence that just exists out there the way like a galaxy exists, whether we have telescopes or not. And to say that religion exists, whether we have a concept of it or not.
That sense, right.
In that sense, I would be careful. You could say, of course,
you would say like,
yeah,
like I don't know if it exists.
but at least what we are talking of when we discuss religion, it's it really matters like what we mean by the term, but the term doesn't necessarily. I don't think we will ever find like the absolutely right term which captures, which carves the religious reality exactly as it is. For example, that everything, every religious phenomenon will be captured by the definition, but the definition will leave out every phenomenon which is outside of religion. Like sports doesn't count as a religion, so we need a definition that leaves out sports. Now I'm thinking, as you mentioned earlier, that the concept is more like a tool, and that the borders between the religion and non-religion are fuzzy. So it's not exactly, we cannot, well, we can if we want, but it's just a conversation, and we cannot really say, draw a line and say exactly like this is religion and this isn't, and there is this line. But yeah, this is yeah.
So I have I was kind of a big influence in my education in religious studies was this scholar Jonathan Z. Smith, who basically said, the concept of religion or the definition of religion is basically a tool, as we've said, that you use for like specific purposes. So like you define it, depends what you need to do, what you're interested in, what you want to focus on. That determines your definition of religion, not like some correspondence with reality, basically.
Yeah. So it's more like a choice you make for the purposes of a more specific research project or investigation. Yeah. So I think that, but let's move to this issue of the, now that we're talking about concepts, this issue about science and what we mean by a science of religion, because you have discussed, so your latest book is the Beyond Heaven and Earth, a cognitive theory of religion. And in that book, you are criticizing the idea that there should be this divide where you have the humanities and you have the natural science, and that people think of them as doing entirely different things, like they belong to these different cultures. And you are, in different ways, you are trying to show like how they can learn from each other, how a natural science approach to religion can be useful, but it also can lead down this path to this highly reductionistic approach. But how also in the humanities, people should probably learn some biology and talk to people in natural science to learn some things that can help them. And how do you think, what do you think, how can we move beyond these two cultures idea, that there are these two different, I don't know, cultures that cannot talk to each other? Or
I mean, so that's a hard one, as you know.
It's a big question. Yeah.
I mean, it might not actually be possible in our current kind of configuration. Like it might be very like I mean, just pie in the sky, we say in English, my hopes kind of in that book. But so I take inspiration from research areas that do this integration. There aren't so many, but that's one of the reasons why I like the cognitive science of religion. At least it's trying to do that. So bring basically this consilience model, as it's called, that you know of, like that we should do our best to, in all scientific, scholastic, academic fields, to work on translating across the disciplines, a kind of interdisciplinarity, um, and work together in teams across disciplines to try to solve problems. And since religion is something, I mean, there seem to be elements to religion that it's useful to think about in harder scientific terms, like, for example, depending how you define it, of course, but when did religion start? Like, how did it evolve in Homo sapiens? You know, that type of question, you really can't answer it without some kind of attempt to integrate humanities and harder sciences like biology. Um, of course, there's a lot of resistance, like to bridging these cultures.
And I find that very fascinating because I also sometimes get resistance to this idea. My ideas about explaining religion in terms of biology,
Mm,
and I just find it interesting that I think that when I'm thinking about one of the inventors of the religious studies, the Max Müller,
mm,
he he talked about he said that we need he compared the study of religion to language, studying language, and he said that we cannot be expert to be. He said that Homer is an expert in Greek and Shakespeare was an expert in English, but that doesn't mean that they knew what language was
mm,
like. And one can. I think that in the humanities, the focus is on getting this really detailed, like contextual knowledge of religion, how it is expressed, how religious behavior is expressed in one context in a very detailed fashion.
mm,
And that is very valuable, interesting. But if your question is like you mentioned, how did religion arise in Homo sapiens? Probably something like biology and evolutionary theory needs to be part of the story. Like
mm,
that we cannot to be able to say, and we probably cannot ask if our question is like, why does religion even exist? It doesn't I don't think it helps to interview religious people and observe them, like, because we're just getting more data. In
mm,
my view, it's like you're observing a ritual and you're getting a lot of data, but what if your question is not like what is the characteristics of this ritual, but what is a ritual at all? Like, what
mm.
does even rituals exist? Then I think that something like moving into natural science seems to be a better approach. But it all depends on what we want to achieve. What we
Absolutely.
um,
And
but
there's also
yeah.
obviously like I don't know, there's a politics to it as well, I think, that
Mm.
is, you know, I don't fully grasp it, but there's a bad history of bringing humanities closer to like a biological framework, you know, in the 20th century that
Yeah,
people are still worried about. And
we can
I don't know.
explain.
There's also kind of the I saw this thing going around Facebook about how among from my s- classmates in
Yeah.
graduate school about how Steven Pinker is like the most annoying person in the world. That was like the headline. And
Okay.
it like had to
Why?
do with like that he wants to be reasonable and stuff, or like the like it's like
Mm,
the smugness of science or something, or hard science that people in the humanities perceive or something. It's a weird I don't know if they like that they people it's like a competition like that one
mm,
thing humanists think that people in natural sciences think they know it all, like they have,
yeah.
you know, the truth on their side or something.
Mm.
And that's, I don't know, people don't
Maybe it
like
has to
that.
do with how people talk. Like
Yeah.
some of these like hard-nosed natural science guys are talking in the way it's sort of triumphalistic way, as if
Yeah.
like they have the answers and
Mm.
they don't like these postmodernist, naive humanities. And
Yeah.
of course, that's upsetting, or that is
Yeah.
so. Maybe it has to
Talk
do with
down to them kind
talk
of.
down to them, like they're like mansplaining things,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
well, while they're actually there could be a very useful conversation between.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
the
but
other side is that the
mm,
humanists want to say there's a history to concepts, there's a historicity to science that it
yeah,
has to be taken into consideration, like that, you know, um,
that seems a good point that they're
yeah,
making.
yeah,
But let's put it in some context that this idea of explaining cultural phenomenon in terms of biology, I think that you were mentioning. Do you agree that people think they relate it to like 19th century racist anthropology or racist theories of human nature, where in the 19th century people thought that humans could be carved into these races that were entirely different from each other, but which actually today paleoanthropologists they completely reject
mm,
racist biology. But
yeah,
people in humanities, maybe as you said, they think for them this has to do with the 19th century racism, and then of course the Nazi ideology and their racist view of humanity. Yeah.
yeah, like a scientific racism. I think that's somewhere in the background of the worry
Yeah.
that humanists have that are critical of something like cognitive science, religion, or humanity.
Because I've experienced a couple of times that I presented some things about a biological perspective on culture,
Mm,
and at two times people have reacted that by mentioning racism. Well, they didn't call me a racist, but they said, "Well, this sort of reminds me of
mm,
racism," and it always was troubled by is there any connection between 19th century racism or racist science and contemporary biological study of culture? And well, I don't think it is, but maybe they have a point that some natural science approaches are historically naive, that they could. Maybe it has to do with the way things are presented and more than the actual what they're actually saying. I'm not sure.
yeah, I mean, I think it's fair. There are racists who use, I think, kind of still, I mean, it can be used for like ideological purposes, I think. Still
Mm.
today, some of the work like about ethnicity or, say
Mm.
like people are like, what is the relationship between IQ or something and
Yeah,
ethnicity or something? People, you still can be used for politically ideological reasons, a lot of this stuff, to
yeah.
say different things,
Mm.
not necessarily legitimate use of the science,
Mm.
but
And to say, I think some people have a tendency, it's a well-known tendency to, of course, to generalize when they talk about cultures, like the way people are, like Muslims, they are like that, and Jews are like that, and Christians are like that. And they
yeah,
create these stories, these really simplified stories, and talk about each culture as if it's has some sort of essence that never changes, as if there's this static nature to each culture. But
yeah,
well, that might be how the racist scientists thought about these things, that there were these
mm,
inner or inherent qualities to different groups or different people, but
mm,
that just isn't how the
no,
contemporary scholars of religion or biology, how they think about it. So
no. And I think more and
yeah,
more people are growing aware of
mm,
I mean, trying to understand how diverse human beings are and how
yeah,
much of a role that culture plays in the mind, but not just, but like local culture. I'm not talking about like broad culture. I'm talking about the way that you're raised in your
yeah,
local culture, how that influences your cognition, so to speak. So
yeah.
so it's not this old way of thinking about kind of static human nature or something like that. At least
Mm.
how I like to see it.
So let's talk about so the cognitive science of religion. I think it's not a very well-known field in Norway, and I'm very happy to announce that I'm writing a book in Norwegian about this topic, about religion in the biological perspective, because I think even though in English there are many books about this topic, it's not uh, literature in Norwegian on this topic, and but there are every year there are published many books on religion, but I have never seen anyone, or only a few, but they are not based on the latest research. But the cognitive science of religion is entirely, or not entirely, but quite unknown in Norway.
Hmm.
And
Oh, that's great that you're doing that. I think it's really needed, especially then I can have it in my course.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that
But
sounds
yeah,
great.
it's not that well known in Norway, or I mean
Mm,
it's I mean in Denmark it's more popular in even
yeah,
in the study of religion as kind of a subfield.
yeah.
In Norway, there haven't hasn't caught hold as much.
And let's talk. So, if so, what do you say to your students when they take your course and they have never heard of cognitive science of religion? Like,
Hmm.
how, like, what kind of research area is this?
So yeah, I mean it's we kind of touched on it earlier. Like
Yeah,
I try to all the things we've talked about, um but so it's trying to understand and explain religion with in light of the idea that it's a something that human beings have and do, and that
mm,
human beings are one type of animal that exists on planet Earth among many other species of animal, and we have this thing that we do that we call religion. And so just so it's kind of like I guess I would say it's like an ethological perspective. Like,
So that means it has to do with observing animals.
yeah,
Like ethology is the study of animal behavior, right?
animal behavior. So yeah, so what how I do cognitive science of religion is a type of animal behavior.
Yeah.
How do we explain it? How do we understand it? Um, and so animals have psychology, but
Yeah.
human beings have a very special psychology
Mm.
that relates to our behavior. It's how there's a relationship between our minds and our behaviors.
Yeah.
So it's trying to understand how all of those things kind of go together to try to
Yeah.
explain religion or understand it. Like I basically tell them anything you're interested in as far as religion is concerned can be approached from this angle.
Mm. And the term, the name is cognitive science. But of course, so when people hear that word, they might think of cognitive psychology, like the study of thought processes, like
Yeah.
perception and memory and reasoning.
Yeah.
I think it's important that it's much broader than this. It's really much broader than cognitive psychology. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's just a part of cognitive science, as you know, like, so it's a bit wide interdisciplinary field. It might, maybe it, I mean, sometimes I say mind sciences to avoid that term cognitive
Yeah.
because people are somehow afraid of it. But so philosophy is part of cognitive science, anthropology is part of it,
Yeah.
computer science is even part of it. Ethology, as I said, evolutionary biology is part of it. It's a wildly interdisciplinary.
And also the humanities are part of it, since, for
Absolutely.
example, philosophy and or biblical scholarship or
Yeah, yeah.
history. And because you have, when I came into this field, and you invited me to many seminars, and you introduced me to people, and I realized that I'm discussing with people from all these different fields, like as you mentioned.
Hmm.
So I couldn't see those like hard-nosed reductionist people.
No.
I just saw like people from all kinds of disciplines who were working on
Especially
this.
now, I think since the last 10 years, it's become even kind of less dogmatic and sciencey for some reason. It's
Yeah.
opened up more to
Yeah.
humanists,
Mm.
you know, traditional humanists. So,
But I think that the this field began. So when we use the term cognitive science, so cognitive science came from. It started really in the 40s and the 50s with the computer revolution, and that's where it comes from. And then it became sort of an approach where computation is the metaphor for understanding the mind, how it works. So I
hmm.
think that when this field was developed in the 80s and 90s, I think you see this computer metaphor everywhere. Like the
Absolutely.
brain is a computer, and we need to figure out like its algorithms,
Hmm.
and then we can figure out how those algorithms produce religion. Almost like religion is like a software,
Yeah.
and how that software is copied, and it leads to religion as culture. And I know that you have been very critical of
Hmm.
that specific
Yeah.
approach to that. Can you say something like, why do you think this computation view of the mind wasn't the most helpful to explain religion. Like,
Yeah. So I think it was good at the time. I mean, it was a useful metaphor. It's obviously a metaphor. Um, so what the mind or is like, trying to make sense of it. And there are some useful analogies that are there, but I think like basically things have moved on since then. Um, we did have a debate about this at the last meeting. We had cognitive science people in Krakow this past summer, where some people were saying we should still keep this computer metaphor. It's still useful. And there's the new approach, which is this 4E approach, using an active cognition, where the metaphor of the mind is more like it's an organism. So the mind is like a living thing. So I guess it has to do with like, what is the purpose of having a mind? Is it to
yeah.
do calculations, or is it to keep the organism alive, basically? What is the kind of guiding metaphor there, for lack of a better word? And it's going to lead you down different paths depending what kind of metaphor you take. So
But
uh,
how would you characterize CSR today, this field? How is it both the computer metaphor and 4E? Or is it, do you see
both, but I think it's moving. I think the
a movement?
computation metaphor was the previous generation, or like as you said, that was the initial reception of the cognitive approach in for people interested in religion, was seeing it with this computational metaphor. But I
Mm.
think fewer and fewer are kind of seeing it that way. Um, so like this approach of this inactive approach, which is explicitly against that metaphor, trying to act against that metaphor.
Can you explain a little bit about this 4E approach? I think many of my
Yeah.
viewers are not aware of what it means.
Yeah. I mean, there now some recently my former mentor wrote in our chat group that there's like also a 7E approach now.
Oh no.
So the E's just keep getting added.
Okay.
But anyway,
I
but
just know like two or three of them actually,
yeah,
or
so it's
understand them.
like cognition, like thought or the
Yeah.
mind, whatever we want to say, it's uh extended is one of the E's. It's embedded. It's enacted is the fourth E, and it's embodied is
Yeah.
the first E, maybe. So that embodied is maybe the most important E, like in the of people trying to think of alternatives to, again, this computational metaphor. Um, so your mind, is a product not just of your brain, but your embodied brain.
Mm.
Uh, that you have a full body that does things, and that body stands in is embedded in a social cultural environment. That's the embedded E. So your mind is not just a brain, but it's an embodied brain in relation to other embodied brains in a given situation, in a given
Yeah.
environment. With that, we extend our minds are extended out even beyond our bodies. So, for example, with technologies, that's the obvious
So
one.
that we store information on the computer
Yeah.
it's an
On,
example, right?
on a writing pad, on a
That
book,
yeah.
we have lot, lots of practices that where we use the world around us to think with. Um, so we're constantly interacting with the world in order to think.
Yeah.
And then the last one, the last E is the that basically cognition is like an activity. It's not, it's built in actions. That's that's where you want to look when if you want to understand how thought works is
Mm.
in actions.
So I can see that it is really different from the computationalist approach, because a computer will not do anything unless you program it or tells it to do something.
Yeah. Hmm.
And software can be, you can install the same software on different computers, or you can delete the software, but you have the hardware still. So the software, like the
Hmm.
program, and the actual computer, physical computer, is
Hmm.
very different.
Yeah.
Well, but what you're describing is like an approach where the mind is intertwined, like much more closely with, as you said, with the body and also with our surroundings. That's a but I have struggled to grasp, for example, to raise one issue with that, to grasp how we can have some. So it seems hard to get away from the idea of the representation somehow, that I can have this propositional knowledge about uh, the capital of France, and how many people who live in Norway, or um, I can have propositional knowledge that seems to be that doesn't seem embodied. It just seems to be like symbolic and abstract. Like, how
Hmm.
can just I never the computationalism can explain, because computation is symbolic.
Hmm.
It's operating on symbols, but and language is symbolic, so I can see the
Hmm.
connection there. But with embodiedness, I always struggle to understand how can there be representation
Yeah.
of abstract knowledge. Well, that's of course a huge
Huge question.
question.
And I would say
Uh,
it you don't you're not claiming that you understand it even from a representational perspective. So like
yeah.
we have this debate all the time now because like there are still people who like the idea of representations in the cognitive approach, and then this new 4E approach tends to be anti-representational, whatever that means. People kind of don't are talking past each other a lot of the time.
Mm.
But I think people actually agree that like at least with regard to religion, there's a lot of like representations all over the place. But the issue is more like in the say in the mind or in the brain. Like
Mm.
we don't know how those propositions you just said work. We haven't found the
Yeah, that's true.
representations anyway, so it's still everyone's just trying to figure out all that stuff out.
But at
There
least the
was a interesting
computationalism,
thing I read.
yeah,
So in the I forget it was talking about the AI revolution and Anthropic and Claude, the AI agent that Anthropic has. And they
not
were
tell me
talking,
about them. Yeah.
well, and they were basically saying that all these LLMs, they basically challenged that earlier computationalist in a way
Okay.
framework where like they thought in order to have a an agent AI that can pass like the Turing test or something or can talk to you, you need to give it all these rules like
Mm.
grammatical rules like you would an algorithm. that where you have an input and then an output, but that's not at all how these things work. They're not really given rules like that. They're just told to train on all this data, and the more data they have, the more they can predict, like, obviously the next frame, but it's not the next part of a sentence, but it's not based on learning any like algorithmic rules. So it
Yeah,
makes
so
it
it's
challenging
not computation in the
in
sense
that
that
same sense. Of
those
course, it's
atheist computationalist people said.
exactly. It's gonna be
Okay.
some. It's hard not to say it's some computation going on in a sense, like with neurons and
And I think
yeah,
that they pass the Turing test all the time.
of course, yeah,
People have fallen
they
in love
blew
with
that out of the water.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's not even that was interesting because it was like a thought experiment that kind of came true, but then it didn't. It seems to no longer. I mean, it obviously can pass the Turing test, but people still don't necessarily think it's intelligent. So,
Yeah. Well, the Turing test. Well, the threshold for passing it is very low. It's too
yeah,
easy to. So it's not a good test for whether something is conscious. I think it's too
definitely not.
easy to.
And also, I've been saying lately, like we know in religious studies, we say, we have this hyperactive, we hyperactively attribute intentionality
Yeah.
and agency and consciousness to the world around us. So we kind of have a bias when we're doing the Turing test to see it as intentional anyway. So it kind of
Yeah.
we're so likely to, say something is
So this is a big concept in the cognitive science of religion. This hyperactive agency detection.
yeah.
So that's the was it was a really important idea in the early stages of this field. The idea that it was like a module in the brain.
Mm, mm,
Is also
yeah. Yeah.
shortened to had. But you're talking about agency detection. Doesn't have to be a module. It doesn't have to be a specific thing in the brain, but more a tendency we have to seek patterns or
Yeah.
meaning or patterns or agency in our surroundings.
Yeah. And to be fair, I think Stuart Guthrie, who was one of the guys who came up with that initially in the 80s and 90s, I think I don't know if he really thought of it as a module in the brain. He
Yeah,
definitely thought of it in very like pragmatic terms that we attribute agency kind of heuristically as
yeah.
a way to kind of get by, and but sometimes he drifted more into like a, I don't know if it's computational, I guess it was kind of way of thinking about it. But yes, so like I think of it more as, I don't know if the way I think of it solves it, but as a just primordial, like it's one of
Mm.
the most basic things it's something almost all living things do, like that they on some level are able to differentiate a, a living thing from a non-living thing, or like that would be useful for an organism to
But the
differentiate.
idea is also that they often have these false positives, that they make mistakes,
They
that
over attribute.
over attribute, so that if if I walk late at night in the forest and I hear a sound behind me, I think there is someone there or an animal,
Hmm.
but it could be just the wind, like a branch that snapped because of the wind. But it seems that what you're saying, that something similar to that is going on when we discuss with these AI language models, that we
Yeah.
sort of over attribute agency. So we are tricked into thinking that we are
Yeah.
talking to an actual person.
Yeah, all else being equal, it's like the better safe than sorry, way. It's
Yeah,
better to attribute agency, because if you're wrong, the downside is better. It's less of a downside if you're wrong. So like, you know,
uh,
if it's a bear that snapped the stick and you attributed agency, you survive. And
yeah,
if it's but if you don't attribute agency, you don't survive. If it's not a bear and you attribute agency, there's very little harm done. So it's this negativity bias that might be a very much more basic mechanism that's almost built into all living things, like a kind of negativity bias,
yeah.
than it is like a agency module or something like that.
So I think that this idea of this of finding religion in the brain somehow in these specific places is problematical for many reasons, and well, I'm thinking about this approach in cognitive science to localize something in the brain. I mean, it goes back to like Broca's area, which is
Mm,
about language, Wernicke's area, which are also they're about language comprehension and language production.
mm,
And well, some of that is still, I think, valid, even though it has been qualified and criticized a lot. But
mm,
this idea that there is a God module or God or like a God faculty or a place or specifically for forming beliefs in God is something. Well, I in my PhD thesis was one of my papers was a discussion of this idea that there is this module, God module,
oh yeah. Yeah.
that I discussed, and I have been thinking about it also since then. And there was this study done by Michael Persinger about where he um, um, he created a helmet that could induce a magnetic field. I think it was a very minor magnetic field around the brain of people. And he found that when he put people in a room with that helmet, I think he found like some evidence that they had supernatural experiences, and it was discussed in the media as a big finding that maybe now we can finally like we have found God and he comes from our brain. But
Mm,
then there was a team, wasn't it, a team of Danish scholars who tried to replicate the study with I think, with the helmet that didn't create the field, like a dummy helmet, and
mm,
they found also an effect. I don't know if it how significant that effect was, but seems that it was more about what the brain assumed would happen, or how, like if you went into a room, it was like a placebo. Like if you went
mm,
into a room and there is this serious looking guy in a coat, and you put on this huge helmet and you sit and they turn off the lights, you
mm,
think that probably something amazing is going to happen, and you start feeling that maybe you feel God is present in that moment, or that
mm.
there is this weird being there. And
Yeah.
so I think that the lessons from that story is somehow that it's very problematic to try to pinpoint any specific, to say it's in the brain in a specific place, or even to say that it's only the brain, because as you mentioned, it's embedded, it's extended. It Religion is so, well, it's so complicated. It has to do with so much more, and
Yeah.
that seems that will be when I discussed in my book this. I also will focus on stories and narratives and how and what role they have played in the development of religion, and that is, I'm thinking we can turn to the topic of narratives now,
Okay.
because that will be the final topic in this conversation. Narratives or stories, basically, it's just a technical word for stories. We published a paper last year, which is called The Green Apocalypse: End Time Narratives in the Climate Movement. And before we get into that paper and what we did, let's just talk about what is a narrative? Like, what sort of, from a cognitive perspective, what do we mean by narrative? And or in your view, what is a narrative?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it's a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But what's a story? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like this work in cognitive um narratology, I guess it was the term people use, which basically says that we think with stories, like we organize our thoughts. It's a useful way to organize our thoughts. We might even say it's an example of extended cognition because it's something outside of us that gives us this framework for thinking. So like, I mean, maybe it's just when something happens. It's a situation where something happens. That's a kind of story and a
Like
very
if something
big,
happened at work
yeah,
and you are at home having dinner with your family and you say, well, you can't, let me tell you what happened today at lunch. And
exactly.
that's the
Yeah,
story.
that's a story. So an event, it has some relation to like event cognition, like stories usually involve events and put them in relation to each other.
Like episodes, like,
Yeah, and they have characters, like something happens to someone.
yeah,
So if most of what we communicate is usually in that form or what people find interesting.
yeah,
It's like we're like, I don't know, we tend to gravitate our thoughts like to that framework of things. Otherwise,
of
things
the
don't really
story,
make
of the
sense
event.
to us. Like that's
Yeah,
another thing. Stories also make sense. Like, they have a kind of coherence. And when they don't, it's very confusing. Like, I don't know, Mulholland Drive or something like that. You know,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And
That breaks all the conventions of like storytelling, it's like the character
yeah,
switches in the middle of
it's
the,
more like a dream, like in a dream,
yeah,
these logical sequences of events are like broken apart, and things,
yeah,
one thing can
yeah,
be one thing and a different thing at the same time, and all this, the way the world works is sort of turned upside down in.
yeah, totally.
But I think it's fascinating that stories, I think that children's pretend play, this is going to be, I'm discussing in one of my chapters, children's
Oh,
pretend play. um, it's full of stories. Children create small stories when they play, and they give things like toys, they give them character, they give them names, and they create stories, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and now um, she is upset, or so they
mm,
attribute feelings, they attribute mental states to toys, and they create stories. And well, what do you think is doesn't that indicate that there's something biological um, about this, about stories, that um, they are not only something that children are taught to create, but they the grown-ups stories, they resonate with them because humans have a biological predisposition to like stories or to find stories attractive, or that's my hypothesis. What do you think about this whole idea?
So, I mean, it's worth thinking about, and I mean, so I personally would, I haven't thought about it in this direction, but as you know, I'm more into like a kind of cognitive gadgets
Yeah.
sector of things, which
Mm.
is Cecilia Hayes at Oxford. Her theory about the relation about cultural evolution, basically, where she thinks she can explain most of the things about our cognition that we usually think of as biologically innate, that they're more like cultural gadgets that we have to learn
Mm.
over the course of our development. It can be very early on, and they can have these gadgets can be so powerful that they kind of change our very cognition in the process. Like she thinks theory of mind, for example, is a cognitive gadget. But I think if you can say theory of mind is a cognitive gadget, you can probably say that this
Mm.
propensity for storytelling is one. I don't want to throw cold water at
Yeah,
you.
no, but that
I mean,
that means
but so in
that
other
mean that
words,
this can
we
be
have to
lost.
learn. There probably are
Yeah.
there's some biological element that
Mm.
is important to this process, but a necessary ingredient is we have to be exposed to stories. We have to be taught stories. We
Yeah.
have to be in an environment where people are interested in stories. So in that
That's
sense,
how I think about stories as arising from an interplay,
mm,
like with the surroundings and this predisposition.
yeah, I
But
think,
so it's always an interplay with the surroundings and with the
yeah,
ideas. But
yeah,
I think that, well, you could tell stories to chimps, but
no,
it won't resonate the way
no,
it does with humans. um, um, and I was
yeah,
just thinking that if
totally,
storytelling is a gadget, that means it could get lost if
yeah,
it entails that there could be some cultures without stories, like some cultures where that
yeah,
mechanism was lost somehow.
yeah, I
Like
mean,
if there is one culture that has developed a way to build a boat or to
mm,
fish with
mm,
specific nets, and
mm,
that's like a local knowledge, and for some reason then that culture is wiped out, and then it's that those techniques, that knowledge is just lost forever.
mm, mm,
Might take hundreds of years. When I'm thinking about in our prehistory, before the modern society. But
mm,
you're saying that storytelling could also be sort of like the local knowledge about how to do something, and that
mm,
could also
yeah,
get lost. Just
yeah,
yeah, that's interesting. I just it
that's interesting. Yeah,
seems likely to me
or
there's something biological going
something
on.
more like it would
Yeah,
develop more quickly.
yeah,
Yeah, like yeah. Um, I think there might be, yeah, something. I think I might agree with you that there might be it might be more kind of robust than that. Um, because yeah, I mean,
mm,
it seems like something very unique about the way humans convey information compared to like other animals that we like package them in such a way.
yeah,
Um, and
mm,
yeah, and so obviously language is connected to stories.
yeah.
And language is the last chapter in Cecilia Hayes's book, Cognitive
Yeah.
Gadgets,
Okay.
where she admits it's the biggest reach. She even says language is a cognitive gadget, but she
Yeah.
admits this is her biggest reach and kind of most dubious, like the idea that we don't have some biological kind of predisposition to language is hard to argue. So it might be related to that, what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
something about language itself. I mean, like a
Mm.
verb, having a verb is kind of the basic building block of a story, you know. Something happens.
Something happens and someone is doing something.
Yeah.
So when we talk about language, I think do we talk about verbal language with symbolic meaning and syntax and grammatics, or do we talk about more like information transfer in general, like more broadly?
Great point. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of that language in the first sense, it's not so ancient.
No.
Seems to be, well, you know, probably know. Are we talking about? We're only talking about Homo sapiens when we talk about language in this sense with grammar and symbolic
Yeah, I think
meaning.
that's usually how they define it, like this behavior, well, this
Mm.
you know, uh behavioral modernity where we actually see evidence of
Yeah.
Homo sapiens doing the kinds of same things that we do.
Mm.
That's very recent in terms of hominid past or
Yeah.
even yeah.
So early Homo erectus would not have a language in this sense, but they
Presumably not.
presumably know. Yeah. So
Speculative, obviously.
so Merlin Donald has which you told me about some years ago. He has argued that storytelling was grounded in mimetic. It was a mimetic form of communication based on pantomime. That
Mm, mm,
Homo erectus and early hominins they didn't have verbal language and they didn't
mm,
have the physiology to actually produce the sounds that we can produce, but
mm,
they told stories in a way that resembles the way children pretend play. When you pretend that something happened, you mime events.
mm,
I just found that a fascinating theory, and I am following a webinar at the Liverpool anthropology webinar,
yeah.
and I'm hearing talks about this now that they're building on Merlin Donald's theory, which is 30 years old, where they are actually looking at this mimesis, or what did they call it?
Mimetic.
Well, mimetic
Yeah.
um,
Communication.
communication.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating because mimetic communication, we can all, when we play alias, we do it. We pretend like, okay, now you pretend that you're eating, and then they have to guess what you're doing.
Mm, mm.
Um,
When we play
and
what? What?
it's called as the alias. It's a game. It's in Norwegian. I don't know what it's called in English, but you have a card. You get the card, and you need to pretend that you are the thing that is on the card, and they should guess. The others guess what you are or
Okay.
what you're doing by only miming it.
Hmm.
And
So yeah, I mean, this is like such interesting research. The evolution of language is like so fascinating and complicated and
yeah, and difficult. Yeah,
so much there and also so speculative
yeah,
because we have so little to go on really. Um we don't ever really know because we're just not there, you know.
Yeah,
But
it's totally, it's hard to,
yeah,
and
but
as a non-expert in language, it's really all I can do is learn from some of these theories and discuss possibilities, but
yeah,
how can we ever know?
and like what we mean by language, like you say, is like religion, same problem. Like, what are we actually talking about? Um, is
Well, but there are, I mean, so I think that that the paleoanthropologists, they know from the analysis of fossilized, I mean, mandibles and jaw bones and craniums and everything, and teeth, and uh, they can. I was not aware how much they can actually figure out just by looking at some about this type of evidence. So they really can. I think they can see that the physiology for producing the sounds that we use in language wasn't present if you go back long enough
yeah,
to pre-human hominins.
yeah,
But and then Merlin Donnell, and also there's a scholar, a Swedish guy, Peter Gardenfors, is discussing this. Is trying to show that there must have been some sort of ancient pedagogy, like teaching. Teaching is older than language. He's claiming, but of course, it's how can we know for sure? But still,
yeah.
it's fascinating that he's showing that the
But of
stone
course, teaching
knacking.
is older than language because
Yeah, and
animals.
so he thinks that it was taught through pantomime, like
Hmm. Yeah,
stone tool technology.
it's a really, I mean, I think tracing that is really fascinating. And I mean,
Yeah,
it seems plausible, I think, that it would be that would be one of the ways that ancient hominids communicated with each other was through some kind of pantomime, something like that, through gestures.
yeah,
I mean, probably a very early like gesture was like pointing. You know, the
yeah.
power of pointing is really
He's
interesting. And it doesn't seem like a lot of other animals kind of grasp
mm,
what's being communicated by pointing. But that seems
yeah,
like it would be such an essential thing,
mm,
or uh, that would, you know, be useful
mm.
to be able to.
To realize that the finger is just communication. You're not supposed. It's not about the finger. It's about what the finger is pointing at. That is not. It's not obvious. It is obvious to us, but it isn't obvious that animals should think like that. Should deduce that there is communication from a gesture. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think the gestural origins of language is something I'm interested in as one of the other
yeah,
theories that like it's like pantomime would have been just one of
mm,
many kind of gestures as a kind of precursor, but maybe that isn't so much related to what developed in what we think of as language because we still basically we still communicate a lot with our bodies, like you gesticulate and I
yeah.
gesticulate, so like people like, and that's something we share with almost every living thing, that we can communicate with our bodies, not necessarily with what we call language.
Yeah, totally. We are signaling a lot to our surroundings with the well body language also. Totally.
Yeah,
I think that's ancient. That must be ancient.
yeah.
And so let's so narratives. So we have established it's a story, and I think it's biological, but I'm not sure exactly how it works. And you are skeptical. You think it could be more like a gadget. That means something one must learn to do.
Hmm.
And but let's just leave that an open question and just talk about stories are really everywhere, right? There are narratives in children's play, and when we talk about what happened at work, we create a little story, and we read novels, and we watch movies, and I also think that in the geopolitical context, different parts of the world, different countries, they have national narratives, and there are narratives about what happens and why.
And there's
Seems
also the most important one, maybe you were gonna say, which is
not just you
the
say it.
story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Okay, no, I wasn't going to, but yeah,
So the narrative self, as it's called.
yeah, the narrative, the fact that totally, we tell when we try to figure out who we are, we also have a story about who we are. Yeah. And so there really are stories everywhere, and in our paper we were discussing a story that we have seen grow out of some parts of the climate change movement. So activists who are protesting against climate change, and I think that when we analyze that narrative under the heading that narratives are a sort of fiction, they are based in you use the term the verb to fictionalize. Like when we create story, when we create a story, we simplify reality. We make up. It doesn't mean it's fake or false, but it's sort of
It's
the
made
world
up. There's no
made
way
up somehow.
around that it's made up somehow.
Yeah.
It's
So
some snippet of reality, no matter how you slice it. Yeah.
and so but it was a bit complicated to explain to editors and to peer reviewers and others who read this, that we are saying that these climate activists, they are fictionalizing, but that doesn't mean we're saying that climate change in itself is a fiction. Climate change is but it's also, climate change is an extremely complicated thing that we don't know exactly how it works and how it will turn out. So, but
so we were saying that we accept the scientific consensus, basically, that that human beings are changing, the climate.
Yeah.
Well, and in that sense, it's not false. That part of the narrative is not false.
No.
But what that part of the narrative is combined with is can become more and more fictional. It can be fictionalized.
It moves into the landscape of fiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so the story that we have looked at a structure which goes like this: that the world is coming to an end, and there's very little we can do to change it. Evil people are the cause, but through our personal action and changing the system, perhaps we may be able to save ourselves. That was the structure, end time story structure that we applied to the climate activists' statements to see whether they were it fits into that structure. And I think we really found some examples of many statements that both public statements and online statements, and also by using secondary evidence from interviews that others have conducted, where climate activists literally said that there's really nothing more we can do. the humans are going extinct, and like it's like Titanic is going down and there's nothing we can do. And therefore and the fascinating thing for us was that they said at the same time, and therefore I'm going to protest. Like, but logically it seems really weird to say that Titanic is going down, but we need to do something. Like why? I mean, if the world is ending, why not just enjoy life and get high and don't give a shit? Like, why go and protest if there's nothing one can do? And that was the starting point, I think, for our paper. And
the starting point.
yeah. But what did we find? I mean,
well, one of the things is like it relates to what I'm working on right now about like agency, and that there's a kind of paradox in agency. Like, so like one of the things people do maybe when they're put under stress is they're more likely to like ritualize. So like as a way to like kind of feel like you're doing something. If you feel like you don't have agency over something, one alternative is you kind of ritualize and then you do get some kind of agency some other way. So we were looking at the protesting and the activism as a kind of ritualization. Partly that was one of the aspects, I think, of the argument. So like that's kind of a response to this like loss of agency.
so when we feel that our agency is threatened, we there's a higher chance that we will ritualize, that we will act ritualistically.
Evidence for that, or like that's at least some of the cognitive science of religion discusses that.
And I think that the paradoxical thing about this is that the agency, well, you could say that when people experience the effects of climate change directly, like a terrible storm or terrible flooding, or their agency is obviously threatened. But most of the activists that the interviews that were conducted with Westerners, with people from like weird countries, like democratic, industrial, educated places where they probably are less, they are not exposed to, their agency is not threatened as it would have been if you lived in a small Pacific Island community, or in a poorer country that didn't have a good response system or resilience to these things. But still, they some of the most adamant statements about the end of the world came from people like Greta Thunberg, and many, and also a group of Swedish climate activists that were interviewed. And Sweden is a pretty privileged place in the world. Like, so we were discussing that also the threat to the agency comes from the story, from being immersed in the story, by entering a story and enacting that story through the activism. One is actually also living inside the story. It becomes a reality as one moves into the story and enacts it. So the threat comes. So there's an interplay between the story and the psychological response to it and the behavior that I found it very fascinating. That also you could achieve that interplay also regardless of whether climate change is going to kill us or not. Because if you're living that story, it's real in the sense that you're living that in that reality. That doesn't mean we're saying it's not a fact, but it's just interesting when we bracket, as in the study of religion, we can bracket the question about what is actually going to happen, and just look at the interplay there.
And
Yeah.
totally. And we were also looking at kind of what are the kind of effects on you psychologically if you tell certain type of story rather than another. So if you tell yourself like an apocalyptic story, where is that better or worse than, is it better to tell yourself or people around you that you're all gonna die, or that everything is okay? You know, which you know, in this situation, and we kind of had some
Yeah.
ideas about that, but
Yeah.
so obviously we don't know the future, so in that sense
Yeah.
it's fictional when you tell stories about the future. And we
Yeah.
also got
Yeah.
into that question a little bit, like,
Mm.
but I think we had to drop that out of the final text.
Yeah, and I also think that we dropped out the more explicit connections with biblical apocalypticism that we
Yeah,
were initially we were
yeah,
thinking about analyzing the
like
biblical,
Revelation.
yeah, Revelation, the book of Revelation, and we were also discussing biblical prophets
Yeah,
like Amos or Jeremiah and
yeah,
ancient prophecy, and trying to connect that with the idea of people like Roger Hallam and Greta Thunberg
mm,
as sort of secularized prophets. So
yeah,
that maybe we can get into that in a later, in another paper.
yeah, we can.
So, and I'm just saying that the final question is about, so some narratives are great in many ways. They can help. They can really help, as you mentioned, help us achieve a sense of agency in the face of real or not real danger. But anyway, if we
Mm,
feel threatened, stories can help us. But stories can also be very destructive. So I think that there are lots of hateful narratives out there, and how can we resist if a story if a story about Muslims or Jews or other minorities is
mm,
catching on, and people are starting to live in a sort of reality where they start developing these racist attitudes, or they are afraid of people because of they belong to a group. Like how can one resist the power of these stories, like because they can catch almost like a virus, I think, like in terms of memes, like how can you resist these stories, like get out of how can people move out of the stories if they start living inside a
mm.
bad story.
I mean, obviously, I don't have a perfect answer to that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, I mean, the some stories seem really hard to pull out of, and
Yeah.
in some ways, you could say there are some stories like entrenched in
Mm,
Anglo-Saxon, you know,
mm,
European cultures that are really hard to kind of get ourselves out of those structures.
mm,
Uh, but I guess just one thing would be like reflexivity about the stories. I think
mm,
this move to say all stories are fictional is a
mm,
way to do that, because then you kind of deconstruct the whole
mm,
idea of the allure of a story. Like if you're basing your whole sense of, or your whole politics, let's say, on a story, you should be a little bit worried about that. Like I don't think you should base any politics on a story.
yeah.
You should have a lot of different stories, basically. You shouldn't have one
Mm.
story, you know.
So there can be counter. So one strategy would be to create counter stories, like
Mm,
other stories
yeah.
that are not destructive.
but they might be a lot less good stories, you know. People like the story, like, for example, of like a Jewish conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful story that makes things so easy for so many people,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Well, there's something that these destructive stories, they latch on to this fear, this when people are afraid of other people, these stories sort of latch on to that fear and provide a sort of explanation that, well, again, I think it's the same process that those who get immersed in these hateful stories, they feel a sense of agency. That
yeah, through it, yeah.
yeah,
They feel
no, I
the
mean,
loss of agency, like this,
yeah,
there's this force out there that's like keeping me down,
yeah,
you know. So that's the loss of
yeah,
agency. And then they need to kind of reconstruct their agency in some way.
yeah, and that these, well, and the stories also create they elicit the fear, and then they sort of provide an explanation
Yeah.
to slow down the fear that there is an explanation. Well, so I mean, well, in Norway there were in the 30s, there were surveys and people were really afraid of the Jewish people. They thought they were like a threat
Yeah.
to Norway,
So there
even
were
though
barely any.
there were barely any Jews there, and most people had never met a Jewish
Yeah.
person, but they still felt that they were a threat, probably because of, as I said, because of the power of these stories. So
Yeah.
so totally, it's something to think further about how we can resist hateful stories. So, well, maybe that's a good place to conclude the conversation. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, Gabe.
Thanks for having me.
That's been great.
Yeah, it's been fun.